Ever contemplated the shrouded genesis of the Canaanites, a people inextricably linked to profound darkness, their very existence tainted by a fateful curse? They inhabited the land destined for Israel, yet engaged in horrific rituals, venerating deities of unimaginable terror: Baal, Ashtaroth, and Molech, names that reverberate through history with chilling dread and utter horror. These weren't mere fables, they were terrifying gods, insatiable in their demands for the most appalling sacrifices, including innocent children offered upon infernal altars. But what malevolent force compelled an entire civilization towards such depravity? Extremes. Why did God ordain their complete annihilation, showing absolutely no leniency? Was it purely about territory, or was there a more profound motive at work today? We will reveal the terrifying reality of the Canaanites and their religious practices, a reality whose reverberations are still felt globally. Are you prepared to delve further into the sinister core of ancient rites that nearly consumed Israel? Let's expose the startling history that has been obscured for generations. Type 7 to 77. If you're eager to plunge into this narrative and ascertain why these deities nearly led to Israel's downfall, continue reading. Prepare yourself, as the complete revelation is on the verge of being unveiled, a revelation so profound it might utterly astound you. Music. Delve into the genesis of the Canaanites and the chilling deities they venerated. Music. From the dawn of Genesis, it's evident that the scriptures are not mere chance occurrences or trivial narratives. Each lineage, often glossed over, forms a subtle web of spiritual foundations, enriching the epic story of God's interaction with mankind, subtly woven into Genesis chapter 10:6. That we initially discover a name poised to reverberate hauntingly throughout the annals of sacred history: Canaan. The scripture states plainly the sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan, appearing as merely another branch on the extensive post-deluge family tree. However, under the discerning gaze of Scripture, this seemingly insignificant reference evolves into a powerful omen, heralding the emergence of a civilization destined to profoundly influence Israel's trajectory, not only politically but crucially in the clandestine spiritual warfare. What is most shockingly and arguably disturbingly, the Canaan curse wasn't Canaan's fault. His lineage suffered due to his father Ham's blunder. Imagine Genesis 9:22. Noah, saved from the flood for his righteousness, lies naked and drunk. Ham discovers his father's vulnerability, the text vaguely hinting at something unsettling. Transgression profound enough to resonate across generations. Then comes Noah's ominous decree: "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his kin." Why was it Canaan, seemingly innocent, who shouldered this curse rather than Ham himself? Some scholars ponder if young Canaan exhibited unsettling premonitions of the moral depravity that would ultimately characterize his lineage: arrogance that transcends boundaries, a voracious appetite for carnal delights, and a perilous inclination towards idolatry. Could it be that the Almighty, perceiving the core of humanity in the arc of civilizations, presented a prescient vision of this lineage's destination? Or perhaps this divine declaration stood as an ominous herald, foreshadowing the depraved roads the Canaanites would later tread, recklessly embracing acts so vile that God's very sanctity would be provoked to intervention. Reflect, if you will, on inheriting a legacy where ancestral decisions seem to predetermine your fate. Envision the future. What sensations might arise sensing a phantom presence shadowing you, murmuring of destinies forged by unknown ancestors? Yet, within this sobering narrative lies a profound theme of divine retribution, echoed centuries later as Israel prepared to inherit the Promised Land. God seems to be illustrating from the initial verses a vivid dichotomy between a nation destined for sanctity and those succumbing to profound idolatry and unspeakable rituals. Is it conceivable that we too are often haunted by spiritual inheritances we didn't select? urging us to shatter patterns and embrace something immensely superior. This Genesis transcends a mere genealogical footnote buried in ancient texts. It's a vibrant, resonating theological premonition. Its ominous reach extends across time, seizing the very essence of Israel's developing fate. The Canaan lineage would eventually bloom into nations notorious for a depravity so profound it permeated every stone and shadow of their realm. Imagine entire civilizations erected upon the gnarled columns of temple harlotry, crimson altars thirsting for innocent lives, and frenzied orgies honoring deities like Baal, Ashtaroth, and Malik. These ghastly rites weren't mere random acts of depravity. Rather, they were the chilling reverberations of an ancient malediction, cascading down through the ages, compelling evidence that divine verdicts are never coincidental, but the manifestation of a celestial justice that perceives with absolute precision. But now let your soul absorb this profound question. Why did the Almighty meticulously preserve the precise genesis of these actions? Folks, why did the Divine Spirit meticulously ensure these disturbing details were permanently etched into sacred scripture? The resonating answer demands attention. Israel's entire journey in the Promised Land becomes incomprehensible without truly understanding the Canaanites and the divinely ordained trajectory of their fate. Here, profound currents of biblical theology begin to draw us into the ensuing shadowy chapter. We aren't merely confronting a nation damned for ancestral misdeeds. They would face condemnation for their current practices, would one day resolutely and powerfully opt to journey back with me to a profoundly unsettling episode in the Bible, immortalized in Genesis chapter 9, 24-27. The scripture nearly vibrates with the gravity of its message. When Noah awoke from his stupor, realizing what his youngest son had perpetrated, he declared, "Forever cursed be Canaan. The lowliest of slaves shall he be to his kin." Initially, doesn't it strike you as profoundly unjust that Ham, the transgressor, is absolved while Canaan, his blameless grandson, becomes the focal point of Noah's severe malediction? How many would vehemently denounce this injustice if they were present? However, the Divine Spirit urges us to delve further, to penetrate the superficial offense and perceive the spiritual framework underpinning Noah's ominous pronouncements. For generations, academics and wise individuals have grappled with this event, debating its ethical ramifications and deciphering its concealed allegories. Yet one verity remains immutable. This was not just fleeting human wrath. Noah, the selected vessel and patriarch, was stirred by divine influence, an ethereal hand directing his words to pronounce a prophecy influencing nations' destinies. Within that proclamation, he transcended mere punishment. He unveiled a preordained destiny intrinsically woven into Canaan's lineage. Envision yourself present, hearing this curse resonate throughout Earth's rejuvenated beginnings after the deluge. Wouldn't dread grip your soul, contemplating the potential future atrocities these utterances might unleash? Canaan swiftly recedes from the vile legacy of his bloodline manifests horrifically before our very eyes as history dramatically unfolds. We witness his descendants emerge, the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Perizzites, a chilling procession of nations that saturated the land with every single repugnant atrocity the God of Israel loathed. This territory, ironically destined to become a sacred haven for God's chosen people, had already morphed into a bastion of utter depravity. Can you envision the horrifying spectacles? The agonizing screams of children brutally silenced upon altars dedicated to Molech, priests and priestesses descending into acts of sacred sexual perversion, unholy fires blaze in temples, demons hailed as wise, all stemming from blatant defiance of Yahweh. A chilling mystery of divine justice. Canaan's curse wasn't a mere reaction to a single act, but a revelation that God judges the trajectories of entire peoples. Some may balk, but doesn't the Lord, who sees all, know the end from the beginning? He knew from Canaan's lineage would spring forth, cultivate a culture captivated by shadows, enthralled by false gods, and vehemently rejecting his divine essence. Could unseen inheritances, boons, or conflicts originating far before our time still shape us now? Are there discernible patterns within our families or communities echoing past decisions made with audacious impulsiveness? As we delve further, observe how this malediction wasn't simply a judgment on bygone eras, but a prophetic seed planted deeply within humanity's narrative, inevitably blossoming into acrimonious consequences. That seed would eventually erupt into outright clashes with God's chosen people, contaminating the very land destined for divine purity and distinction. As we delve into subsequent chapters, embrace this conflict. These age-old shadows aren't merely remnants of the past. They echo critical lessons about the immense impact of choices, the burden of inherited legacies, and God's unwavering invitation to differentiate ourselves from the alluring chaos of a world astray. If you were an Israelite listening to these stories by the fire, would your commitment to honor Yahweh ignite with even greater intensity? Facing the unknown beyond the Jordan, anxieties might arise, realizing how swiftly any nation can transition from grace to hardship. Scripture remarkably delineates Canaan's borders, a seemingly mundane geographical detail imbued with profound spiritual meaning. Genesis 10:19 meticulously outlines the Canaanite territory extended from Sidon southward toward Gerar as far as Gaza and eastward towards Sodom, Gomorrah, and Admah. In Zeboim extending to Lasha, this wasn't merely a cartographer's draft. These lines etched on the map would transform into the grand arena where history's monumental battle between light and encroaching darkness would unfold, a confrontation pitting the alluring, bloodthirsty deities of Canaan against the sacred, zealous God of Israel. Nestled strategically between the imposing empire of Egypt and the majestic civilizations of Mesopotamia, this land served as the vibrant nexus of the ancient world. Caravans overflowing with precious spices, shimmering gold, and intriguing foreign goods traversed its sun-baked paths, and philosophies, tongues, and traditions intermingled, basking freely in its radiant sun. Yet this affluence and bustle ushered in a sweeping tide of moral degradation. Ever ponder why certain locales appear predestined as proving grounds of temptation? Canaan epitomized this, its bountiful valleys hinting at abundant harvests, its fortified cities shimmering like gems. However, veiled beneath this allure lay spiritual perils so profound they imperiled the very essence of God's chosen people. Delve deeper and discover a land teeming with nations sharing a similar, shadowed lineage, the descendants of Canaan, who cast deepening shadows of corruption across the land. Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, names destined to evoke dread in Israelite hearts. Each tribe tenaciously clung to spiritual customs so fundamentally at odds with God's precepts, transforming their cities into vibrant monuments of rebellion. Picture wandering through the vibrant streets of Jericho or Sidon, merchants peddling exquisite fabrics, children playfully weaving through bustling marketplaces, priests rhythmically chanting captivating invocations to Baal or Ashtaroth beneath imposing temple structures. Columns sense the palpable spiritual tension, alien, adversarial to Abraham's God under the celestial expanse. These aren't mere traditions. This land pulsates with sacred prostitution, enticing fertility deities. Terrified, warped parents sacrifice their own offspring, incinerated alive before Molech. Imagine the chilling screams piercing the night, drums struggling to bury the torment as a priest elevates another innocent child towards the consuming fire. Meanwhile, these practices flagrantly defied God's sacred promise to Abraham. To your descendants, I will bequeath this land. Genesis 12:7. Was God so precise in detailing Canaan's boundaries because each city, summit, and sacred grove was a spiritual arena, teeming with entities resisting his sanctity? As Canaan's lineage proliferated, they seized territory from the radiant Mediterranean to the Jordan shores, their sway permeating the sun-drenched landscapes. From the stark Negev desert in the south to Phoenicia's verdant northern hills, Jericho's formidable ramparts, Hebron's venerable avenues, Sidon's vibrant docks, and Gaza's guarded portals morphed into focal points where paganism throbbed with sinister vitality. Each child offered upon cold stone, each temple harlot consecrated in profane union, boldly declared a spiritual rebellion against Yahweh's tenets. Does this potent history hold a chilling modern-day echo, hinting at the susceptibility of whole cultures to construct monuments to contemporary obsessions, popularity, avarice, unrestrained indulgence, disregarding the timeless principles that once defined them? Imagine Canaan overflowing with sanctuaries, resonating with sacrilegious incantations. Envision yourself amidst the Israelites about to be instructed to traverse these frontiers. Would your conviction waver, anticipating the trials ahead? Or would it intensify, resolute to champion a deity whose sanctity cannot abide the darkness? Ultimately, these borders transcended mere cartographic lines. They were sacred demarcations, picturing a realm steeped in spiritual danger but ordained by prophecy, a ground where God's narrative of salvation and reckoning would unfurl in stunning, awe-inspiring spectacle. And this spectacle had only just commenced. Let's take a breath and truly ponder this for a second, isn't it? Bewildering, almost haunting, that the very soil God vowed to Abraham, a land rich with abundance, fated to be a fountainhead of divine grace, was upon, making the covenant already swarming with tribes immersed in the most atrocious of abominations. Doesn't this ignite a profound fire within you? This wasn't a chance encounter. It was the enigmatic hand of destiny guiding Abraham's lineage to claim their birthright. Simultaneously, God was calling for its cleansing. The Canaanite conquest transcended politics. It was a sacred decree with Israel as the divinely appointed agent of this righteous reckoning. Observe as the Canaanites proliferate, extending their sway from city. From fortified settlements, we discern that their territorial surge transcended mere geographical increase. It represented the swift, unyielding propagation of a culture brazenly opposing the living God. Each new foothold established, every colossal shrine dedicated to a false idol, resembled a defiant fist shaken at the heavens, testing divine forbearance. Can you perceive how each festivity, each offering, each alluring rite accelerated the divine countdown? The more the Canaanites thrived outwardly, the closer they edged to the moment when celestial justice would irrevocably descend. As their depravity infected the land, territories charted, nations solidified, a cosmic conflict loomed, pitting Yahweh's sanctity against Canaan's audacious idolatry. Exploring Canaanite society unveils a disturbing reality. Their very existence interwoven inextricably with religious zeal, utterly devoid of neutrality. Every public forum, familial tradition, commercial accord, even intimate acts, governed by their pantheon's dictates. Though their cities may have left a lasting impression, visitor captivated by grand walls, ingenious irrigation, vibrant markets, yet a lingering stench of decay underlies the splendor. This civilization, remarkably advanced, suffered spiritual erosion. A chilling paradox, prosperity concealing moral bankruptcy. In Canaan, promiscuity, a public sacrament, not a private sin, flourished in Asherah and Ashtaroth temples, where ritualistic sex secured divine favor. The deities boon upon their harvests and flocks envision a realm where tipsy festivities aren't just endured, but celebrated as a holy obligation, where youngsters witness their folks cavorting semi-nude by shrines instructed that joy is the ultimate sacrifice to divinity, and the gloom stretches far beyond sensual indulgence. Burrowing into the soul of kin parents watched with glazed fanaticism as clergymen guided their offspring to Molech's fiery bosom. Infant forms hurled into the fiery embraces of bronze effigies, superheated by inner conflagrations. Devoured voiceless screams destined to reverberate eternally, should Stone recall. Could your very soul withstand such sights unscathed? The Almighty himself denounced these acts as detestable in Leviticus 18, forewarning Israel with unwavering severity. You must not follow the practices of the land of Canaan, where I am leading you. You must not live according to their customs. What profound depravity necessitated such unambiguous divine decrees, if not the absolute horror of their prevalent existence? Canaanite culture was far from merely different. To Israel, it represented a profound spiritual infection, a corrosive moral force that decimated everything it encountered. Their entire value framework stood in stark defiance of Yahweh's directives. Where God demanded sanctity, they glorified unbridled desire. Where he treasured and safeguarded life, they nonchalantly extinguished it upon demonic altars. Where he instituted righteousness and empathy, they propagated inequity, sorcery, and ceaseless idolatry. Astonishingly, and perhaps most perilously, it was utterly captivating. Their rituals mesmerized the senses with enchanting music, hypnotic dance, elaborate iconography, opulent attire, and exuberant festivals awash in wine. A dense, alluring fragrance permeated Canaan's valleys, tempting even the virtuous to sample its venom. Is it surprising then that God, in his boundless grace, commanded this culture's utter eradication? Not from malice, but a sacred imperative to shield Israel from descending into the same dark chasm. Picture if the Israelites had dismissed these perils as trivial cultural oddities. How soon before their offspring stood, petrified, before Moloch's fiery forge. But what precisely constituted this lethal potion? What does genuine spirituality resemble in daily devotion? Who were these sinister entities, ravenously consuming blood, pleasure, and human dignity? To truly comprehend the sheer horror of the Canaanite world and appreciate why divine justice blazed so fiercely against it, we must draw even nearer. We will venture beyond the curtain and encounter the appalling deities they revered, witnessing firsthand the monstrous desires that dominated Canaan's very essence. Are you prepared to journey with me into these darkened sanctuaries? To behold the abysmal depths to which a civilization can descend when they turn away from the living God? The Canaanite religion wasn't merely a set of crude superstitions. It was an elaborate, meticulously crafted spiritual forgery. But be clear, it was profoundly twisted, a hellish perversion of authentic worship meant for the Creator. Visualize a world where every sacred emblem is reversed, every holy truth contorted, every godly tenet subverted. As Israel stood at Sinai's base, trembling as God etched his law in stone, the Canaanites were ensnaring themselves in a spiritual structure that seemed imposing outwardly, but was decaying internally. Their devotion wasn't a serene individual decision. It fueled their civilization's core. Every aspect of Canaanite life, politics, yields, intimacy, conflict, familial duties, stems from their belief system. Religion wasn't merely pivotal, it was the system. Envision a society where every choice, from edicts to sowing, hinged on appeasing savage deities. This realm was consumed by spiritual darkness, not lurking in shadows, but reigning supreme from the highest peaks. At the zenith of their corrupted faith stood a blasphemous trinity. First Baal, deity of tempest, fecundity, and dominion over the natural world, perceived both as the provider of sustenance and the enforcer of allegiance through brutal rites. Next to him was Ashtaroth, goddess of battle, allure, and procreation, enchanting with her beauty, but binding with insatiable desire. She was worshipped in ways that obliterated the boundary between sacred and sensual. Then there was Asherah, occasionally seen as Baal's consort, the feminine essence linked to El, the alleged father of the gods. These weren't mere symbols. They were believed to roam amongst the populace spiritually, requiring unwavering devotion through ritualistic depravity. But perhaps the most sinister entity was Moloch, the silent, fiery god with outstretched bronze arms. He didn't seek accolades or grain offerings. He demanded children. Can you envision the sheer horror etched in a child's gaze? The chilling resignation on a parent's face, offering their own flesh and blood to the inferno, convinced they were venerating the divine. This wasn't mere Torah worship. It was pure savagery masked as holiness. Could you have endured standing within those temples without shuddering? Could you have witnessed such atrocities without collapsing into tears? These temples, erected upon prominent hills, visible from afar, were not sanctuaries of peace and prayer. Scripture repeatedly mentions them with profound dread and contempt. They were veritable arenas of darkness, where debauchery was disguised as sacred rituals. Revered drunken revelries symbolized fertility rites, and even gladiatorial battles were deemed divine spectacles. The altars weren't pristine. They were marred by gore, occasionally animal, but frequently human. Grotesque, sensual, and demonic idols stood as silent sentinels to the profound depravity infecting the land. Many were crafted with outstretched arms, not for affection, but to cradle the blazing forms of living sacrifices. Doesn't that vision scar your very soul? This wasn't simple superstition. Scripture reveals a darker truth. A dark game was afoot in Deuteronomy 32:17. Moses exposed the chilling reality. They offered sacrifices to demons, not to God, to deities unknown to them. What seemed like cultural practices was, in truth, a demonic communion. The Canaanite religion was a complete and operational system of demonic reverence, taking the sacred creations of God, the human form, sexual relationships, family bonds, acts of devotion, and defiling them beyond comprehension. Yet, the most disturbing discovery is that it was effective, at least from their perspective. Humanity thrived as harvest burgeoned, metropolises blossomed, commerce surged, offspring arrived, precipitation descended, and wealth exchanged hands. Superficially, the structure appeared not just operative, but triumphant, embodying the authentic peril when malevolence camouflages itself with outcomes. A key factor rendering Canaanite belief so insidiously alluring, due to its pledges of prompt gratification, conspicuous accomplishments, and comprehensive societal sanction, obviating contrition, the pursuit of sanctity, or soul-stirring verity, prioritizing solely hedonism, dominion, and efficacy. In this illuminating perspective, can you now truly grasp why God didn't merely perceive the Canaanites as inimical tribes dwelling in land destined for Israel? Nay, he recognized them as a far graver menace, a complete, structured uprising against his sacred design, a framework engineered to defy his sanctity and imprison the very spirits he yearned to liberate. Thus, when the verdict was delivered, it stemmed not from a tyrant's rage, but from the righteousness of a divine God safeguarding his people from being consumed by shadow. Yet, what profounder terrors lurk below? These deities, what ignited such an insatiable hunger for blood, sex, and absolute dominion? To genuinely comprehend the force behind these idols, we must delve deeper into the spiritual core that empowered them, and the infernal entities that govern Canaan with an unseen, unyielding grasp. Dare you confront the visages lurking behind the altars to expose the real overlords of Canaanite veneration? Our next journey leads us into their sacred spaces and further, to completely fathom the horrifying depths of the spiritual chasm as we venture further into the shadows. At the very core of the Canaanite belief system, an encroaching darkness coalesces around Baal. His name reverberates throughout the Old Testament like foreboding thunder, casting shadows of fear in its wake. Baal wasn't just another neglected idol. He was the colossal focal point of the Canaanite spiritual realm, the radiant sun around which their idolatrous rituals revolved. Indeed, Baal represented Yahweh's, the God of Israel's, paramount spiritual adversary, with his very title signifying Lord or Master. The terrifying dominion he exerted over the Canaanites' hearts. Baal wasn't some far-off legend or flowery symbol, but the potent power fueling the vital rains, the one who shattered the skies, inundating the land, ensuring flourishing crops and grapes laden on vines. Baal embodied the spirit of conflict, the architect of triumph, the very essence driving abundant harvests, and ultimately the sustainer of existence itself. Envision residing where your sustenance, your offspring's well-being, and your country's safety were. All surmise their fate hinged on the capricious whims of such a deity. Imagine them sculpting his likeness, youthful, robust, overflowing with vitality, frequently wielding a thunderbolt, a symbol of his dominion over the heavens. The Canaanites tenaciously embraced this image, unwavering in their conviction that Baal's benevolence ensured overflowing rivers and bountiful harvests. Conversely, when drought plagued the land, terror gripped their souls, for they believed Baal had succumbed to a seasonal demise, prompting them to conduct macabre, frenzied rites to rouse Baal. Throngs descended upon temple grounds, coupling with consecrated prostitutes and staging obscene public rituals mirroring the deity's union, hoping to spur fertility and prosperity. However, Baal's adoration was a depraved spectacle, intertwining lust, spiritual decay, and innocent bloodshed. Their yearning for resurgence was misdirected towards a deceitful deity, marking the horrifying genesis of true depravity. Awaken him. It is striking how this resonates closely with truth, yet remains profoundly distorted. Their union might incite Baal to mirror it in the heavens, unleashing torrential rain upon their desolate lands. What the divine intended as the hallowed, delicate bond of matrimony devolved into a macabre spectacle to exploit the supernatural. Can you sense the profound sacrilege? The cherished gift of sexuality, meant to bind spouses in sacred covenant, was perverted into a debauched carnival of ritualistic fornication, utterly devoid of dignity and respect. And the depravity deepened, for when harvest failed or catastrophe threatened, their dedication plummeted to unfathomable depths, offering human sacrifices. Some legends whisper, even firstborn children, to appease Baal's wrath. Picture yourself amidst a throng, witnessing hesitant hands offering a child to ravenous flames, praying their cries would soften a god of stone. Could your spirit endure such horror without fracturing? This wasn't a clandestine cult. Baal worship was a state-sanctioned religion, upheld by vast priestly orders and endorsed by kings. Embraced within the everyday tempo of Canaanite existence, majestic altars honoring Baal ascended boldly beside Asherah's idols, visually announcing an impure union between masculine and feminine demonic forces. These weren't mere regional anomalies, they were societal cornerstones, and this alluring system of devotion didn't remain confined beyond Israel's perimeters. Its tempting influence stealthily infiltrated God's elect nation. Reflect upon Ahab, the king of Israel, who erected an imposing temple for Baal right in the very territory Yahweh had consecrated for himself. Envision the prophet Elijah on Mount Carmel, a solitary beacon against Baal's countless prophets in the epic 1 Kings 18 showdown, witnessed more than just sacrificial combustion. The heavens unleashed divine fire, a stark challenge to the malevolent entity Baal embodied. Astoundingly, even after such undeniable power, Israel wavered, tempted by the deceptive allure of Baal's altars over the god who liberated them from Egypt. For Baal was the very essence of a corrupted worldview. A spiritual framework, a global perspective, vowing immediate rewards, intense sensory gratification, and widespread social endorsement, all at the terrifying cost of one's essence. Doesn't it seem some enticements remain remarkably consistent? If Baal dominated as the principal god, who amplified his influence, subtly tempting worshippers, the revelation plunges us further into Canaanite idolatry's sinister realm. Ashtaroth, the deity of desire and conflict, an enticing figure whose saga will reveal what's next as we delve deeper into the chilling abyss of a faith that audaciously defied God's sanctity. Are you braced to witness humanity's descent when pursuing deceptive deities? While Baal commanded fertility and storms, Ashtaroth, also known as Astarte or Ishtar in nearby territories, reigned as his queen, venerated throughout Canaan as the fearsome mother goddess. But don't be deceived by that label. She wasn't a benevolent protector of life, nor a nurturing force of warmth and empathy. Rather, Ashtaroth epitomized a chilling perversion. She embodied the raw, untamed sensuality of war, steeped in bloodlust and religious rapture, utterly devoid of innocence. Picture a world where motherhood was reimagined, not as gentle nurture, but as intoxicating authority, where feminine sway was gauged by alluring enticement and the ability to spark delirium. This was the Canaanite ethos, where her veneration was so inextricably linked to their existence, it molded entire lineages' perceptions of womanhood, matrimony, pleasure, and even divinity. Sacred scripture unveils the deeply intertwined nature of Ashtaroth's cult with Baal's. Judges 2:13 resonates as a sorrowful cry as they abandon the Lord, embracing Baal and Ashtaroth. Side by side, this blasphemous duo mirrored a twisted divine matrimony, binding the people to cycles of desire, delusion, and spiritual bondage. Feel the dark pall this unholy alliance cast upon the land promised to a sacred nation. Visual representations of Ashtaroth definitively showcased her essence. Sculptors rendered her a figure flaunting exaggerated feminine features, her ample, brazen, and utterly enticing form sculpted into postures that beckoned instead of veiled. Every curve and flourish a paean to sensual power, a declaration that unbridled pleasure reigned supreme. Surrounding her sacred space, towering poles known as Asherim pierced the heavens, their initial appearance deceptively innocent, even charming, resembling groves swaying gently in the wind. Yet, beneath these allegedly hallowed canopies, unfolded scenes of astonishing debauchery. Temple prostitution was far from uncommon. A sinister rumor murmured by foes, it was brazenly enacted, enshrined as devotion. Imagine families strolling by, children glimpsing rites perverting God's sacred gift into a public display under Ashtaroth's priest's gaze. Bodies, divine vessels, temples of spirit, reduced to tools for demon-honoring rituals. Doesn't that chill you? Grasp profoundly how dramatically the sacred was perverted, and perhaps most disturbingly of all, it succeeded at least by human standards. The Canaanites were utterly convinced these acts of ritualistic sensuality unleashed palpable blessings. Fields flourished, herds, burgeoned sons and daughters entered the world in their perception. Ashtaroth delivered on her pledge regardless of the ethical price, but her reign didn't conclude with lust. Ashtaroth also embodied the war goddess in vision. This paradox interwoven into a single formidable deity warriors would advance into battle with. Her name echoed on their lips, vowing that triumph would bring bacchanalian celebrations in her name, where desire and brutality intertwined in her cult, and Thanatos' allure and demise converged on the crimson altar. Picture the disquieting influence of such a being, a goddess who offered both the intoxicating thrill of ardor and the untamed splendor of victory, all in one hand. Gradually, the original Canaanite perversion infiltrated Israel itself, as sadly depicted in 1 Samuel 7, 3-4. Visualizing the infiltration's profound extent, Samuel implores the Israelites to forsake their foreign deities, specifically denouncing Ashtaroth, demonstrating that this alluring idolatry had entrenched itself within a nation destined for holiness. Is it not profoundly sorrowful that those entrusted with bearing Yahweh's sacred name were discovered prostrating themselves before idols and groves consecrated to a goddess who personified all he abhorred? And is it not profoundly unsettling to contemplate how effortlessly the Canaanites fused spirituality with depravity, presenting a religion that tantalized? Sensuality knew no ethical constraints and seemed to lavish its followers with affluence and triumph. This was the ethical abyss they eagerly dove into, pulling others down with them. Ashtaroth stood as a vivid example of how profoundly humanity could descend when prioritizing gratification over principle and desire over virtue. However, despite the darkness of her cult, Ashtaroth was not the sole power. Looming even deeper within the void was another deity, one who not only twisted life's precious joys, but also insisted on its absolute annihilation. Behold Moloch, the devourer of children, his altars stained with the essence of innocence. As we venture further, we shall descend deeper into this nightmarish Canaanite underworld. Are you braced to witness the sheer terror of rebellion against the divine, where depravity, brutality, and gore coalesce in a perverse act of devotion? Among the countless vile abominations of the Canaanites, nothing casts a darker shadow than the veneration of Moloch. This was the absolute nadirs of pagan idolatry, the ultimate abyss. Descent into utter moral depravity, Moloch wasn't merely another false idol. He represented the horrifying zenith of their corruption, a grim testament to humanity's boundless capacity for wickedness when utterly divorced from sacred truth. Unlike Bel, who allegedly summoned rain, or Asheroth, who pledged sensual pleasures and triumphs, Moloch craved no adulation. He scorned fragrant offerings and elaborate rituals. Moloch's hunger was infinitely darker, monstrous. He coveted the most invaluable gift a society bestows upon its children. Can you fathom the sheer terror? The very destiny of a family, the pristine innocence of a newborn, deliberately sacrificed to a demonic entity masquerading in disguise. God's sacred word confronts this atrocity with unwavering, laser-like precision. In Leviticus 18:21, the Lord proclaims a decree that echoes fiercely through the ages. And you shall not give any of your offspring to offer them to Molech, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. This was far more than just a cultural transgression. Child sacrifice was an abhorrent desecration, a brazen affront to the divine. It wasn't mere slaughter, it was a ritualistic uprising, defiantly spitting upon the Creator who meticulously crafted those fragile lives within the womb sanctuary. Envision, if you dare, the chilling spectacle: colossal iron idols, monstrously forged into grotesque chimeras, often sporting a man's powerful torso and a bull's ferocious head, dominating the landscape. Their fiery bowels roared, flames hungrily licking at the outstretched metal limbs, which radiated an unholy glow. Crimson glow enshrouds these fervent arms. Parents surrendered their progeny, diminutive forms quivering in bewilderment and utter dread. Priests, draped in shadowy robes, unleashed thunderous drums and piercing flutes, a sonic assault that vibrated the very atmosphere, desperately trying to suppress the screams that would have shattered the most empathetic soul. Does your spirit shrink from this vision? It must. This was earthly damnation masquerading as sacred piety. At this juncture, Canaanite faith spiraled beyond redemption. This surpassed merely. Sexual deviancy and idolatry marked a complete surrender to demonic control. Child sacrifice wasn't a shameful secret. but a publicly endorsed ritual ingrained in Canaanite culture. Communities congregated, observed, and gravely affirmed as innocents were devoured, trusting these deaths guaranteed triumph in battle, bountiful harvests, and blessings from their abhorrent deity. Heartbreakingly, this wickedness transcended Canaan's borders, infiltrating the souls of Israel, God's chosen nation, like a lethal toxin. In 2 Kings 23:10, a stark reminder surfaces, illustrating the pervasive reach of this influence. It recounts the actions of the virtuous King Josiah, who desecrated Topheth in the Valley of Hinnom. His explicit intention was to prevent any individual from sacrificing their son or daughter through fire to Molech. Can you sense the profound sorrow embedded in those words? Israel, the nation divinely chosen to radiate God's sanctity, had tragically descended to emulating the very atrocities Yahweh had commanded them to eradicate. Is it not deeply unsettling to contemplate how a society could possibly plummet to such depths? Profoundly, Molech transcends a relic of antique idolatry. He signifies the inescapable destiny when a society forsakes divine holiness. Obscenities are brazenly normalized. Demonic veneration masquerades as heritage, and heinous atrocities are sanctimoniously disguised as sacred obligations. Molech represents spiritual delusions culminating horror. Humanity's conscience cauterized until utter depravity is not merely tolerated, but fervently championed. Ponder that reality. Living amidst neighbors who regarded such horrors not with repulsion, but with devout veneration, convinced that thunderous drums guaranteed abundant blessings. This epitomizes the moral chasm into which the Canaanites descended, pulling legions along. Thus, as we stand at the precipice of this abyss, peering into the flames that once engulfed the vulnerable, we start grasping why divine retribution descended so intensely upon these nations. It wasn't arbitrary brutality, but the imperative excision of a malignancy poised to devour all. Behold, in Molech, we witness the ultimate chilling outcome when a society utterly spurns the sacred principles of the vibrant God, swapping his divine radiance for the alluring illusions of falsehood. Yet, as dreadful as Molech's adoration was intrinsically, the truly unsettling aspect lies in its non-isolated nature. Molech was simply a somber edifice within an immense, imposing framework, a sprawling spiritual dominion painstakingly constructed by the Canaanites. This wasn't a haphazard jumble. Superstitions, a refined, structured religious system boasting temples, holy scriptures, intricate ceremonies, and priests zealously upholding doctrines. Imagine a world where the vilest deeds aren't hushed whispers but proudly showcased as core life rituals. This raises a profound query. What spiritually toxic elements did the Lord discern in these Canaanite practices? The chilling decrees he delivered with such pristine precision demanded the utter annihilation of these civilizations. Why was there no space for diplomacy, no chance for a harmonious existence? The revelation emerges as we delve deeper into the core of Canaanite faith. In Leviticus 18, God unveils a somber account, meticulously detailing the depravities that had corrupted this land. Incest ingrained within familial bonds, bestiality embraced as integral to their rituals, temple prostitution sanctified as sacred obligation, and innocent children offered alive atop burning embers. Altars, and then he utters words that pierce the very heart of divine justice. In verse 27, he proclaims, "Indeed, all these detestable acts were committed by the people of this land who preceded you, thus defiling the land." Observe closely that it wasn't solely the inhabitants who were corrupted. The very ground beneath them was spiritually stained, utterly permeated by the deeds of darkness that had unfolded upon it. Is it not astounding to contemplate that sin can penetrate so profoundly that it appears to infiltrate the stones and fields themselves? Canaanite religion was a comprehensive system of utter depravity. Their practices morphed into a terrifying cocktail of inebriated revelry, public indecency, self-mutilation, dark magic, and instances of demonic takeovers. Clergy didn't just guide, they embodied vessels seized by sinister entities, leading devotees through euphoric delirium, staging rituals descending into utter lunacy. Rumors of ritualistic cannibalism deepened their notoriety. This wasn't mere isolated moral failings. An entire civilization hurtling headfirst into the abyss of depraved spirituality. For Israel, idolatry represented a grave danger to the nation's core essence, as Canaanite rituals weren't somber duties, but alluring indulgences meant to ignite every earthly desire. They offered unchecked pleasure, spiritual empowerment detached from righteousness, and instant gratification without self-discipline. Is this not a sinful the human spirit still yearns for this? Hence God's repeated warnings. Do not emulate the practices of the nations I am driving out before you. Leviticus 20:23. Could there be a more explicit caution regarding the allure and lethality of such a culture? Among their most infamous traditions were the fertility celebrations igniting under the radiant moonlight. Imagine scores congregating in torch-lit forests, men and women intermingling without restraint, young and old caught up in communal fervor. Orgies unfolded beneath the towering idols of Baal and Ashtaroth. Nearby, priests readied blood-soaked altars. Children were ushered forward for sacrifice as drums pounded, flutes wailed, and a visceral wave of lust, terror, and brutality coursed through the throng like a sentient being. This was a ritual that obliterated the distinction between the divine and the depraved, where all boundaries dissolved and every act found justification. It represented a society-wide festival of ethical ruin. Crucially, this wasn't a fringe element, but the very heart of their civilization. These weren't clandestine cults lurking in the shadows. Alleyways, a state-sanctioned norm, endorsed by royalty, meticulously governed by priestly councils, instilled in youth as life's bedrock principles. The Canaanites had erected a colossal monument of spiritual depravity, replete with rigid hierarchies, codified laws, and intricate ethics that distorted all virtue into a grotesque mockery. Can you now grasp the intensity of divine wrath and the severity of decrees concerning these nations? As their practices were not merely a casual divergence from biblical truth, but a stark, intentional corruption, were in staunch, unwavering defiance of God's sacredness. As we step back to observe this expansive, meticulously crafted web of depravities, we grasp that it transcended simple cultural variations or benign worship diversity. It was a deliberate, methodically orchestrated revolt against all that is pristine, upright, and vital. A spiritual mechanism engineered to crown malevolent entities and devour souls until divine justice, in its blazing fury, arises to utterly dismantle it. Frankly, doesn't this compel us to question how perilously close might our own world waltz to such alluring shadows, masked by novel names and contemporary facades? Confronted with such breathtaking abysses of depravity, how did the Omnipotent respond? Did he avert his gaze, unmoved as innocents perished on sacrificial stones, as entire metropolises writhed in orgiastic rituals beneath demonic effigies? Nay, our God remained neither mute nor apathetic. His riposte resonated with crystalline clarity and terrifying force, reverberating through epics via the hallowed scriptures. In Deuteronomy 20:17-18, the divine decree thunders, "But thou shalt utterly destroy them, that they prevent you from replicating their abhorrent practices dedicated to their deities, lest you offend the Lord your God." This wasn't some flippant rule nor a capricious act of cosmic brutality, but a profound moral and spiritual sentence delivered by the ultimate judge, a decree foretold and carried out with divine accuracy when the appointed hour arrived. Do you perceive the gravity of these pronouncements? They plunge us straight into the core issue. What was the immense wickedness of the Canaanite transgression that warranted such a punitive response? Unyielding decree, and what does this unveil about God's radiant holiness? Of all the grave commands given to Israel before entering the Promised Land, none resonate more jarringly today than God's instruction to utterly obliterate Canaan's inhabitants. This startles us, compelling us to confront divine justice at its most formidable. However, through the prism of God's rectitude, what appears unfathomable starts to gain a serious lucidity. Reconsider the Almighty's own pronouncements in Deuteronomy 20:16-18 concerning the towns of these peoples that the Lord your God bestows upon you as an inheritance. Spare no living thing, eradicate them entirely lest they instruct you to emulate their detestable practices. These weren't mere tactical targets. They represented pinpoint operations against a pervasive spiritual malignancy, one so advanced that even a trace risked severe repercussions. The grave peril of Israel's moral decay. Imagine the crushing weight on the Israelites, tasked not just as victors, but as agents of divine reckoning. Let's be clear, this wasn't about territorial gains or augmenting Israel's might. This was God's own judgment unleashed upon a society steeped in purposefully nurtured and glorified sin. The Canaanites weren't unsuspecting victims ambushed by fury. For generations, they willingly saturated their lands in bloodshed, exposed their beings and lineages to malevolent entities, nurturing their offspring in darkness rather than illumination. God's forbearance towards them stands as a monumental testament to his enduring patience throughout Scripture. In Genesis 15:16, we gain an extraordinary insight into God's timing as he revealed to Abraham that his progeny would not yet possess the land, for the wickedness of the Amorites had not reached its zenith. 4 protracted generations, 4 centuries would unfold, during which the Canaanites persisted in constructing fiery altars for infants, engaging in dances within sacred groves to appease the pounding rhythm of intoxicated drums, urging them deeper into alliances with spirits rebelling against the Almighty. Isn't it a stark realization that even then, divine grace patiently lingered, offering them ample opportunity, countless cycles to return? But instead of remorse, the Canaanites doubled down. Their sacred sites proliferated. Their feasts escalated into blatant displays. Their offerings became increasingly ritualistic and gruesome, and they brazenly embraced what God deemed an outrage, schooling their offspring to revel in acts so repellent they would have made even the most callous hearts shudder, until their wickedness overflowed, leaving no space for leniency. Divine justice patiently held back, then erupted, not randomly, but with the inevitable gravity of a sentence that could no longer be deferred. Can you sense the rising pressure? A sacred, infinitely tolerant God, yet unwavering in his sanctity, observing generations descend further into shadows, until compassion itself demanded judgment to safeguard creation from utter ruin. Utterly corrupted, the Canaan conquest was framed not just as war, but a holy obligation, purging a land stained by depraved rituals. It was protective justice, shielding Israel from that seductive allure, because Canaan's temptations weren't slight. They were intensely pleasurable, offering indulgence without purity, spirituality detached from devotion, and strength divorced from duty. Could Israel have spiritually endured with such unchecked influences? These are the battles we still face. Accounts propel us further into profound reverence for God's radiant holiness, a holiness incompatible with darkness, a fierce love intolerant of sin's soul-crushing power, igniting a vital question within us. What insidious compromises or alluring temptations do we indulge, presuming God's patience will eternally surpass our obstinacy? History resoundingly affirms that while boundless mercy endures, ultimate judgment inevitably arises to safeguard goodness, purity, and eternal truth when wickedness's threshold is surpassed. Overflowing with iniquity, the cup of sin finally shattered, unleashing divine judgment upon the land. This wasn't a rash decision from an unpredictable God, but a measured decree from a just sovereign, whose enduring patience spanned epochs, witnessing the deepening darkness of generations. Feel the gravity. The very earth lamented under the burden of unspeakable acts, offerings profane to infernal entities, not to the true Creator. Understand this: God, in His justice, shows no bias. It's completely objective. The same rigorous standards applied to the Canaanites were eventually levied against Israel when they strayed down similar perilous roads. The conquest of Canaan wasn't just land acquisition for Abraham's line. It served as a stark, timeless lesson. It eternally proclaims that the divine abhors entrenched systemic sin, especially when it dons the guise of faith, because when misguided adoration morphs from mere individual error to an entire culturally endorsed structure where idols reign supreme and depraved ceremonies are glorified, sin evolves into a sophisticated, defiant insurrection that warrants divine retribution. However, beyond mere penalty existed a safeguarding intention. God's decree of annihilation surged with paternal solicitude. He comprehended the delicate sensibilities of his followers and how readily human perception succumbs to seductive rituals and alluring festivities promising bountiful harvests. Children triumphs delights if Israel coexisted peacefully with the Canaanites. Inevitably, curiosity would blossom into emulation into alliance. And tragically, that precise downfall materialized when they neglected the sacred decree entirely. Repeatedly, the people succumbed to the allure of Canaanite deities, burning offerings on illicit shrines, permitting their offspring to be seduced into unions that wove pagan customs deep within Israel's core. Is it not profoundly unsettling to contemplate how a solitary thread of vulnerability can shatter a whole fabric of belief? This verdict marked not just the Canaanites' demise, but Israel's holy genesis. The land required purification, not only from its people, but also from the intense spiritual defilement permeating every stone, tree, grove, and peak. Only then could it be hallowed as the ground where God's name would reside, where genuine worship offerings would ascend from Solomon's temple, and eventually where the Messiah himself would walk. Have you ever considered that even Bethlehem's soil, where Jesus was born, was once desecrated by Canaan's horrors and required cleansing to nurture God's incarnate Son? This sacred decree resounds with an immutable truth. God's holiness is uncompromising. Indeed, he exhibits extraordinary patience, hesitates to anger, and overflows with unwavering affection. However, an instant arrives when a nation's depravity intensifies, eroding all virtue, distorting families, perverting worship, and transforming governments into engines of darkness. Then, the very God renowned for forbearance unsheathes the blade of retribution. The annihilation of the Canaanites morphs into a stark reflection for all nations, cultures, and generations, illuminating the gravity of collective sin and cultural idolatry in God's eyes, particularly when veiled as spirituality. Might this celestial benchmark one day judge societies that legitimize abominations, glorify depravity, and entice children to revel in the very darkness Christ sought to dispel? Ultimately, these age-old narratives are far from arid. Ancient civilizations whisper, their chronicles brimming with somber cautions and enduring wisdom for contemporary souls. The divine entity who decreed Canaan's cleansing remains constant, eternally resonating a timeless call to sanctity, urging us to eradicate insidious idols and concealed concessions, thereby preparing our hearts and territories as worthy habitations. Yet, the narrative evolves into a poignant continuation, a celestial tragedy imprinted upon epochs, wherein the divinely chosen, defying crystalline admonitions, mirrored potential human frailties. Little did they anticipate that Canaan's pervasive influence would gradually infiltrate their souls, residences, and sacred rituals. Imperceptibly, initially they embraced pagan deities within their city walls, erecting Asherah poles upon divinely consecrated land, intermingling holy sacrifices with utterly abhorrent customs. The veneration of the living God waned, was undermined, and ultimately tainted by the very idolatry they were divinely charged to eradicate. And what fate befell Israel for condoning the abomination they should have annihilated? The chilling exactitude of God's judgment. Previous cautions materialized vividly. They embodied prophecies uttered ages prior, mirroring the failures chronicled in Judges 2:2-3. God's reprimand echoes with both sadness and severity. Make no covenant with this land's natives. Demolish their altars. Yet you defied my voice. Why this disobedience? Therefore I declare, I will not expel them. There'll be thorns in your flesh. Their deity's a trap. Can you sense the profound sorrow in that celestial lament? Imagine hearing God himself ponder why he acted thus, his dire prophecies unfolding precisely like a stealthy venom coursing through hidden veins. Canaanite influence deeply permeated Israel, with Baal's altars proliferating throughout the Promised Land, no longer confined to secluded groves, but brazenly erected in public spaces once exclusively dedicated to Yahweh's sacred name. Asherah poles resurfaced repeatedly, as if the devastating lessons of Canaan's judgment had dissipated into thin air. Practices once deemed utterly vile and abominable by the Israelites incrementally appeared less repugnant, then vaguely palatable, and eventually somewhat acceptable. Totally accepted, isn't it? Disturbing how transgression frequently mirrors that insidious progression, initially startling, then commonplace, subsequently glorified, ultimately even the atrocity of infanticide. The precise act that had provoked God's severe condemnation upon Canaan was resurrected by Judah's monarchs. Ahaz, followed by Manasseh, guided God's chosen people to immolate their offspring in flames, a practice God had unequivocally prohibited, and judged with divine retribution, was now embraced within Jerusalem's walls. The spiritual decay permeated beyond the altar, eroding Israel. Societally, economically, and politically, the once cohesive nation fractured, collapsing under internal conflict, staggering from one devastating defeat to the next, ultimately carried into exile by foreign invaders. Witness the heartbreaking parallel. The land God cleansed of Canaanite evils mirrored Canaan once more, incurring a strikingly similar judgment. The Babylonian captivity, with its chains and lamentations by alien rivers, was largely the unavoidable consequence of seeds sown far earlier when God's cherished people opted for permissiveness over allegiance, prioritizing worldly ease over unwavering commitment. The ultimate devastation wasn't just political collapse, but a profound spiritual treachery. The populace traded the incandescent splendor of the Almighty for silent idols, impotent deities of wood and stone, deaf to their pleas and powerless to deliver them. They forsook vibrant springs of life-giving water for flawed, crumbling cisterns incapable of retaining blessings. As God lamented through Jeremiah 2:13, "My people have perpetrated twin evils. They have abandoned me, the spring of life-giving waters, and carved for themselves fractured cisterns, flawed vessels incapable of holding sustenance." Could there exist a more devastating accusation? Israel's decline stands as a timeless cautionary tale inscribed within history. When idolatry becomes ingrained, when societal norms begin to mold our faith instead of God's immutable decree, the outcome invariably leads to devastation. The directive to eliminate the Canaanites was never rooted in malevolence. It arose from profound divine compassion, a fervent endeavor by a benevolent God to shield his people from an infinitely greater spiritual demise. More devastating than any blade, Israel's defiance transmuted divine grace into stern recompense. a legacy of prosperity into desolate ruin, leaving descendants lamenting what could have flourished. Does this timeless parable not resonate even now, as insidious temptations burgeon and society sculpts alluring distractions? Do we vigilantly safeguard our spirits with the fervor divinely ordained? Or do we risk permitting that which should be vanquished to fester within, ultimately ensnaring and tormenting us, and ironically our downfall? Yet amidst this pervasive corruption, a compelling contrast arises, intensifying with each narrative and shining brighter against Canaanite depravity. Israel's God, perfectly just, incredibly patient, and eternally faithful, stands starkly opposed to Canaan's capricious, cruel, and impotent deities. Juxtaposing them reveals not mere cultural or ritual differences, but a monumental clash. Two radically distinct spiritual realms contemplate the essence of the God unveiled to Israel. He embodies unblemished purity, flawless righteousness, unwavering constancy, and an overflowing source of boundless mercy and truth. His heart overflows with profound compassion, yet remains steadfast in unyielding justice, a stark contrast to the derisive pantheon of Canaan. Baal, Ashtoreth, Moloch, mere facades for demonic entities, each a malevolent personification of deceit, insatiable lust, brutal violence, insidious manipulation, and the most repulsive distortions of God's intended human potential. Delve deeper into their dominion over hearts, for the true God crafted humanity in his divine likeness, bestowing upon them dignity, summoning them to a life of justice, mirroring his character in the world. Canaanite deities perverted this vision, degrading individuals to tools for fleeting gratification, base desires, and raw impulse. Whereas God proclaims, "Embrace holiness as I am holy," Baal thunders, "Succumb to unrestrained desires." Where the divine seeks genuine repentance to mend broken spirits, Maul demands the sacrifice of innocent blood upon scorching bronze. The Lord cherishes and shields families, nurturing them as havens of love and growth, while Ashtaroth defiles them, cloaking them in allure and flaunting them through ritualistic depravity. In essence, there's a stark, fierce battle between the creator who infuses life and demons posing as deities who thrive on decay and demise. Observe how divine revelation emerged. Israel, not consumed by erratic whims or barbaric practices, but adorned with lucid moral directives, ethical principles, and a sacred invocation to personify both fairness and compassion. In Deuteronomy 6:4-5, we discern a resonant proclamation that reverberates through time. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength." This transcended mere guidance. It embodied an exclusive covenant of allegiance, a hallowed entreaty for unwavering faithfulness, precluding any semblance of divided commitment. Envision the profound significance of heeding this. Encountering those divine words at Sinai's base revealed that the God who proclaimed them also parted oceans and shattered Egypt's power. Conversely, the Canaanites aimlessly navigated life, worshiping countless deities and indulging every fleeting desire. Their impulsive devotion leading to uninhibited excess, their faith a depraved, unrestrained playground masked by elaborate rites hiding profound spiritual vacuity, and they venerated statues sculpted, lumber sculpted, metal forged, stone meticulously carved, inert objects unable to inhale life or utter a word, blind to suffering, deaf to desperate pleas, devoid of vitality and spirit. Contrast this starkly with the God of Israel, a living, breathing, dynamic presence. He wasn't a silent idol on a pedestal. He thundered from flames and commanded the storm. He led his people with a sunlit cloud and a fiery nocturnal beacon. He crushed Pharaoh's arrogance, unleashed water from solid rock, rained sustenance from above, and liberated Israel. Time and again, with arms wide open, idols relentlessly demanded sacrifice after sacrifice, offering nothing in return. Yet the Lord's promises were always fulfilled, inspiring awe. While idols consumed lives, God provided sustenance. As Molech devoured children, Yahweh protected them, marking doorways with lamb's blood to evade death. Idolatry wasn't merely a change of religious practices. It was a devastating spiritual treachery. It signified forsaking the inexhaustible spring of life to excavate fractured cisterns incapable of retaining it, echoing Jeremiah 2:13. My people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns. Broken cisterns, unable to hold water, represent abandoning the authentic God who redeems, revitalizes, and rules, pursuing instead silent, misleading spirits masquerading as divine. The entire biblical narrative transcends a mere record of conflicts and fluctuating borders. It's a cosmic ballet, a profound theological clash. The redeeming God versus the corrupting deities. Relentlessly, it reveals two realms, one of radiant light, vibrant life, and unadulterated truth, the other of encroaching darkness, inevitable death, and alluring falsehoods. Though labels evolve, this core struggle persists with undiminished intensity. Contemporary idols may not bleed or resound with tragic temple songs, yet the allure of dominion, indulgence, and deceptive spirituality still draws myriad souls from the authentic God. Therefore, the resonant question of ancient Canaan still pierces our hearts today. Across millennia, reaching us now, whom will you pledge allegiance to? The divine being, architect of eternity, who inscribes your name upon his palms, offering his very essence for your redemption? Or the countless idols of society, fleeting pleasures, self-aggrandizement, promising fulfillment yet yielding emptiness, demanding devotion yet bestowing only shackles? This pivotal choice dictates all then and henceforth, molding destinies, constructing or shattering civilizations, and determining the ultimate fate of spirits. What shall your response be? Therefore, as we contemplate the profound tapestry of tragedy and triumph interwoven within the saga of the Canaanites, Israel, what endures transcends ancient relics of lost civilizations and ruined shrines. It's a vibrant reflection, revealing perils of succumbing to darkness and the unparalleled majesty of a God beckoning us to sacredness. This isn't restriction, but divine safeguard, setting us aside for elevated purpose, eternally significant. Woven into this saga is a profound lesson. Canaan's demise stemmed not merely from ceremonial idolatry, but from ingrained idolatry, surrendering to primal impulses. Cultural pressures until the sacred was utterly profaned, and what devastated Israel wasn't the might of invading armies, but the gradual decay that occurred when surrounding culture shaped their devotion. God's beacon of holiness became tarnished by the shadows they were supposed to dispel. Isn't this tension still relevant? We live in a world that perpetually exalts new idols, prioritizing ego over selflessness, instant gratification over integrity, dominion over devotion. Profound empathy triumphs over mere facts. Identities shift, yet core tenets endure. Baal's allure echoes in our relentless quest for immediate pleasure. Ashtaroth's influence lingers in the seductive allure of sensuality and eroded familial structures. Molech's thirst for innocence persists, masked by contemporary rationales. God's invitation resounds eternally. Detach, embrace him wholeheartedly with every fiber of being. However, boundless, awe-inspiring hope blossoms. The God who scrutinized Canaan and refined Israel is the very God who dispatched his Son to shoulder our transgressions, inscribing his law upon receptive hearts, summoning each of us into a covenant not of dread, but of profound love and redemption. He aspires not only to purify lands, but to sanctify souls, transforming us into vibrant temples where His Spirit resides. Perhaps the most profound takeaway from this saga is an invitation to scrutinize our own existence. Have we become complacent with societal idols? Have we allowed what should have been banished to fester and flourish? What insidious pacts have we forged with values and customs that directly contradict God's sacredness? Let this narrative galvanize you to actively change, to dismantle every concealed idol, to reject the alluring temptations of a world that overpromises but invariably extracts more than it bestows, to resolutely champion the God who singularly fulfills and redeems. If this revelation has resonated deep within you, take a breath to acknowledge its impact. Articulate your insights in the comments. It not only fortifies your personal odyssey, yet inspires fellow pilgrims on this spiritual journey. Ensure you're subscribed to catch upcoming content unveiling profound divine truths. If compelled, bolster our mission through super thanks or by disseminating these enlightening messages, amplifying our reach to those thirsting for His word. May you navigate life illuminated by God's sacred light and unwavering love, anchored not to transient idols, but to the eternal one.